So today I have the pleasure of welcoming Dennis Porter on the show. Dennis, thanks so much for taking the time to be here.
Yeah, happy to be here and looking forward to the conversation.
Awesome, thank you. So I'd love to get started. As the name of the show kind of implies, Bitcoin journeys. I'm always interested and fascinated by how people originally got into Bitcoin or discovered Bitcoin, let's say. So I'd love to hear a bit from your perspective. When did you discover Bitcoin, and what was that initial part of your Bitcoin journey like?
So great question. I discovered Bitcoin in 2017. I stumbled across it because a friend of mine had said that he found Bitcoin. I'd never heard the term before. First time I'd ever heard the word in my entire life, but he'd found Bitcoin and that he said it was perfectly anonymous internet money. And I said, well, that's not possible. Bullshit. Nothing is perfectly anonymous. So I started to study Bitcoin quite a lot in the early days, just so I could prove him wrong. I was like, there's no way that anything is anonymous on the internet. So started studying Bitcoin pretty rapidly just so that I could figure out whether or not it was true. Ultimately, I come to find out that Bitcoin is not perfectly anonymous internet money, although it does have very significant privacy enhancements. But while I was in there trying to prove my friend wrong, I discovered a lot of things about the technology that I did love, that I fell in love with. Particularly the ability to provide financial services for people globally, to bank the unbanked, to help solve a lot of the problems that we see across the world financially, giving people the ability to save for the future. You know, we take these things for granted here in the United States, the ability to go to a store and buy something, to buy a coffee with our credit card, the ability to have access to the public markets, to buy stocks, to be able to buy bonds, to buy things that can help us save for the future. But in a lot of parts of the world, they don't even have access to the most basic banking services. 2 billion people globally are currently unbanked in the world and have no way to save for the future other than just like, here's an example. In some parts of the world, instead of saving in money, they save in the thing that they want to do. So if they want to build a house, they save in bricks. If they want to be able to build a car, they save in the car parts. They're not able to save up the money to be able to buy those items. They sort of live in the Stone Ages, and yet we are in the 21st century still with 2 billion people who have to live this way. I often tell people, the next Einstein could be coming from one of these parts of the world where they don't have access to even the most basic banking services, but we'll never know because this person was never able to buy their first textbook. They were never able to afford to go to university because they were never able to save up the money to get there. So I think it's critical that people have access to financial services, traditional financial services. I think Bitcoin is a clear solution for that problem. And that's why I fell in love with it right away, immediately, was just totally blown away by the power of the technology. And then, of course, some time went on. I continued to learn about the technology. Right away in the beginning, early days, I started mining Bitcoin, was totally fascinated by my desire to innovate, my motivation to innovate because of Bitcoin. And I figured if other people are being driven to motivate with this technology, then if I'm being motivated to innovate with this technology, then other people are probably being motivated to innovate with it as well. And so I just immediately kept studying the technology, kept pushing for the technology. Eventually, though, when the bear market hit in, I decided to take a little bit of a pause from focusing on it with my resources. I wanted to go all in on mining Bitcoin, and some years went by, and eventually it popped back up again. And from there is when I decided to launch Satoshi Action because I saw that there was a real need for us to get engaged politically. A lot of people in this space, they sort of felt like at the time that we needed to stay away from politics, that we should ignore politics, that Bitcoin has nothing to do with politics. But the problem with politics is that even if you don't like politics, even if you're not interested in politics, politics is interested in you. Politics will be very interested in your life. And so if we as Bitcoiners expect to see a world that embraces Bitcoin, if we expect to see a world that is very pro-Bitcoin, that unlocks the power of Bitcoin, that helps our countries and our people to benefit from Bitcoin, then we're going to have to engage politically. So that's why we launched Satoshi Action in June of 2022. We've been on a mission ever since to be able to educate lawmakers and regulators on the benefits of this technology, and also to pass legislation to help us unlock the true potential of Bitcoin itself. So, I said a lot there. Hopefully, I didn't go too long on my intro, but ultimately, I think it's important for people to have a framework for why this technology is so important to me, and I think so important to our country.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, of course. And I love to get into the Satoshi Action Fund specifically a bit later in the show, if you don't mind, because I think that's a really important part to discuss in a large majority of the show and also finish with. But I'd love to also hear a bit more about you specifically and about your well, because I think the way that you just described it, it made it seem like it was very intuitive almost when you first learned it, and as you mentioned, you came at it from a bit of the perspective of Bitcoin Banksy unbanked and a lot of the benefits that it offers in that way, which I think is very true. But what did were there some initial skepticisms, let's say, about Bitcoin that you had early on, or what was that? That initial deep dive journey into actually understanding how Bitcoin works. What did that look like from your end?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was right away learning how the technology worked. So most people, they kind of look at Bitcoin and they take 2 or 3 times to finally dive deep into it. But in order to know whether or not Bitcoin was perfectly anonymous internet money, I had to understand the inner workings of the technology. So almost immediately, I was diving into Mastering Bitcoin by Andreas Antonopoulos, which is an extremely technical book. It's very technical. It's not for the faint of heart. It was a foreign language to me the first 2 times I read it, but I just kept reading it, kept trying to take what I was learning from the book. And this is before AI existed, so you had to really do a lot of work on the internet to find search results. So I was looking all over the internet, looking all over Reddit, looking over the Bitcoin talk forums, comparing notes. I landed on ultimately that Bitcoin is not perfectly anonymous internet money, but because I spent so much time the very beginning studying the inner workings, not like most people, they sort of look at it, they see it on Reddit, they see it on Bitcoin talk forums, and they sort of work backwards towards the technical side. I started at the technical side. And so right away, I was just very impressed by the inner workings of Bitcoin. And I never had a moment where I was like, well, maybe it's going to be this other coin that works, or maybe this other project is going to be the one that's successful. I'm one of the few people who, just by pure chance of the way I approached it, I knew right away that this is it. This is the ticket. That Bitcoin is the winner, and that we need to do everything to advance this technology. So that's been my goal almost ever since discovering it. I didn't have a lot of opportunities to advance the technology in my early days, but eventually, of course, recently, as you said, we can talk about it later, but Satoshi Action Fund has been a great tool for us to be able to advance Bitcoin here in the United States and internationally here soon as well.
Yeah, super cool. And I think what's interesting there also for me is that, what stands out to me is I think a lot of times when I've talked to people on the show originally, I think what initially compels people to Bitcoin is initially crypto, right? They come into the space because of maybe a hype cycle, and then they first maybe have a bad encounter with some other coins, and then it's only later on that they start to really understand Bitcoin and really understand the fundamental workings, and that Bitcoin really is the signal in the noise, right? But how for you was that so intuitive in the beginning, let's say?
Yeah, I just got lucky, I guess. I mean, listen, like, not everybody decides they need to prove their friend wrong by deciding they need to understand the complete inner workings of Bitcoin. Very few people are reading Mastering Bitcoin as their very first book. And I'm not a technical person. Listen, I'm not super. I'm tech savvy in the sense that I know how to work with technology easily, but I'm not a coder. I'm not a developer. When I was reading the white paper, when I was reading Mastering Bitcoin in the beginning, it was totally a foreign language to me. But I just kept reading it over and over again, and eventually it just clicked. And I realized that Bitcoin is the solution to many of the world's problems.
Yeah.
And when I started, I didn't even discover crypto, the other things, till several months later. And when I did, it was like, it just seemed like a lot of trading, a lot of gambling to me. And, I tried in the beginning to trade to get more Bitcoin. That was the only reason I ever interacted with anything outside of Bitcoin. But I realized I'm not a good trader, and quickly lost some Bitcoin and realized that I don't want to do that anymore. So I've just been focused on Bitcoin ever since, because Bitcoin has so many things that it can offer the world. It can change the world in so many dramatic ways. The ability for Bitcoin mining to balance the grid the way that it does, there's no technology that can do this. The way that Bitcoin mining can help to solve some of the problems with renewable energy, there's no other technology that can help solve those problems. There's no permissionless financial asset that exists the way that Bitcoin does. The level of decentralization it has, the ability to protect itself from any sort of outside attack. The fact that there's no leader, there's nobody that's leading this thing. It's anybody can participate, and we are all truly equal in the Bitcoin world. There's just nothing in. Listen. I'm not going to try to dog on crypto. I think stable coins are clearly useful. There's going to be other things that come out of crypto that are useful, but nothing in crypto compares to what Bitcoin can do to change the world.
Yeah, very, very well said. And what for you specifically drew you to the Bitcoin mining piece early on? Because I think that's a very fascinating part of Bitcoin, and I think it's very underdeveloped yet. I mean, it's obviously there's a really developed mining ecosystem behind Bitcoin, but in terms of like the possibilities of what it can be, I think it's a fascinating field. But for you, what drew you specifically to the mining part as well?
Well, when I first found Bitcoin, just like everybody who falls in love with Bitcoin, I had to figure out how I could do something in Bitcoin, how I could work in Bitcoin. And at the time, it made a lot of sense to start mining Bitcoin. I started mining Bitcoin, got one S9 in my garage. Then I got 3 S9s in my garage. And then my garage started getting too warm. So I had to figure out a solution for that. So I cracked the garage door at first.
Yeah.
Then I got 7 S9s. And then I was like, well, this is too much. Now I'm gonna have to leave my garage door wide open, and these things are valuable. So then I built a whole pod actually, and put it in the side of my garage door to contain all my mining rigs. And then I got 12 S9s. I was like, wow, this is creating a lot of noise. So I put noise dampeners in there. And then I was like, at 16, I think was the top number roughly that I got of S9s. And I was like, wow, my energy bill is really high. So I started trying to figure out how to bring my energy bill down. The whole time that I was doing this, I was dealing with noise, sound. I was dealing with the heat. I was dealing with the high energy bills. And I was just like constantly thinking about how to improve the system, the mining system within my house, and how to innovate. And that's just what I think really let me. I felt the impact that Bitcoin was having on me, and not just the impact I was having on Bitcoin. And I realized that if I'm being driven to innovate this way, then others are likely being driven to innovate this way as well. Now, I wanted to go all in on Bitcoin mining, all in, just like this was it. This is the future. This is what I'm doing. Luckily, few weeks before I was going to go all in, the market crashed. Luckily, it didn't happen 3 weeks later, is what I mean. I rather it crashed before I go all in, so that I didn't have to deal with the consequences of making a bad decision, poor timing, because I had just learned about the technology and was going all in, ready to go all in. But I realized in that moment, I said, you know what? I don't know enough about this. I need to take more time to learn about Bitcoin. I learned about market cycles. I learned about how Bitcoin mining can balance the grid. I learned about how Bitcoin is a powerful tool for combating inflation. All those things happened after that 2018 collapse and crash.
Yeah.
And during that time, those 3 years that went by, I learned a lot about Bitcoin mining as an energy technology. And then I think in the last, because of my work, really, last 3 or 4 years, I've just dove head over heels in learning about how energy systems work and why Bitcoin mining is a powerful tool to balance our grid. Especially as we move towards a clean energy future, you're going to need more and more resources on the grid to be able to balance the supply and demand. There's a term that we use in the space a lot in the energy world, but also in the Bitcoin mining space, called demand response. Ultimately, what that means is that if you have a shortage of supply of energy on the grid, you have to figure out a way to compensate for that. You have to provide additional supply. Otherwise, your grid is going to collapse. Yeah. Or you have to perform rolling brownouts and rolling blackouts. So in order to prevent that from happening, energy providers, energy companies, the grid, they've come up with a bunch of different ways to help solve this problem. The most obvious one is like, okay, well, if I have my grid here and it's connected to another grid over here, let's just buy some power from them to make up for the shortage. That's simple, but that's very expensive because you're buying from the power from outside the system. Another solution is to build gas peaker plants. These are basically just gas-powered, fossil fuel-powered power plants that are sitting on idle, that boot up in a very short notice, and they provide that available supply that they can create to the grid in those peak demand moments where there's not enough supply. That's very expensive also, and also very carbon intensive. So what grid operators decided to do is they said, well, instead of saying, hey, where can we get more supply? They started asking customers, can you, if we compensate you, can you wind down a little bit and reduce your energy demand on the grid during these peak moments? Some people are good at doing this. Some types of loads, some industries are okay at it. Concrete, steel, they're okay at it. Bitcoin mining is incredibly good at it. It's the best demand response resource in the world. In fact, when I talked to a former FERC, Federal Energy Regulatory Commission economist, the guy that has his literal signature on a lot of the orders that went out to create these programs, these demand response programs, he said, let me ask you 3 questions about Bitcoin mining and we'll know how good of a demand response resource it is. He said, does it use a lot of power? Yes. Does it want to be on all the time if given the opportunity? Yes. It wants to be on 100% of the time if given the opportunity. And then he said, this is the third and most important question. Can I shut it off whenever I want, any time of the day for any length of time? And I said, yes, of course, because the great thing about Bitcoin mining is that Bitcoin miners are doing the same thing globally all at the same time. So if you shut off a Bitcoin mine over here, it doesn't impact the Bitcoin network. It keeps on rolling. Now, here's a quick example. In Texas, during Winter Storm Elliott, roughly 30% of the Bitcoin network went offline to be able to provide their power back to the grid. It was about 1,700 megawatts of power in Texas alone, which is enough power to heat 1.7 million small homes in the middle of that winter emergency. 30% of the network in Texas, outside of Texas, went offline during that storm. Bitcoin was fine. It kept operating, kept working, nothing, no problems at all. Now imagine if you went to Amazon or one of these other data center companies, you said, hey, we're going to turn off 30% of your data centers. You would see internet network interruptions all across the space, cascading effects. The world would practically come to a halt.
Yeah.
But with Bitcoin mining, there is no problem. You can shut off a very large portion, probably even more than 30%, especially if it's only for a period of time, not permanently. And you will only see, at worst case, an increase in the block times. So instead of a 10-minute block time, you might get a 15-minute block time. But Bitcoin is going to keep working. It's going to keep operating. And that's what makes it so good as a demand response resource, is that ability to turn off large swaths of the Bitcoin mining network and have no problems on the actual network itself. Once I told this to the FERC economist, he immediately turned around and said, if these things are true, Bitcoin mining is the best demand response customer on the planet.
Yeah, that's amazing. And to be honest with you, the Bitcoin mining aspect, and especially when it comes to balancing the grids, is something that I haven't done a lot of research extensively on myself. And your explanation of that, it makes a lot of sense. So I'm going to try to summarize it just for my listeners as well. And you correct me if I'm wrong with any of this. But essentially what you're saying is by encouraging Bitcoin mining in your state or in your country or wherever it may be, by encouraging that industry, then if you do have an energy demand on your grid in that local city, state, whatever it may be, because the Bitcoin mining industry is so nimble in its ability to, like you said, switch its power off and transfer that power over to something else without disrupting the fundamental underlying network, it's an incredibly useful tool for governments to harness to then be able to, balance the grid essentially, right? Is that correct in what I'm saying? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, yes. And then the thing is that another really important part about Bitcoin mining is it's extremely scalable. So you can have 1 megawatt, 10 megawatts, 100 megawatts, 1,000 megawatts. You can have a quarter of a megawatt. And that allows Bitcoin mining to be able to custom fit to any energy system, any energy imbalance. So if you need a quarter megawatt to be able to make sure that the heat stays on during a winter storm, Bitcoin mining can do that. If you need 500 megawatts to shut off and it's on your system, you can do that. Simultaneously, it goes beyond that. This is just one, what we call ancillary service. Ancillary services are programs that are designed by grid operators so that we can be able to balance the grid, keep the grid running and functioning properly. One of the other important ancillary services, so we have demand response, which is a supply and demand changes to make sure that there's enough available supply when demand is high.
Yeah.
There's another ancillary service program called frequency regulation, or frequency response, depending on who you talk to. This is what helps keep the heartbeat of the grid intact. So in the US, we have to maintain a heartbeat of 60 hertz. In Europe and most of the world, you have to maintain a heartbeat of 50 hertz. And you have to maintain this within a 1% ratio at all times. If you don't, your grid will collapse. I mean, people really don't understand just how complex and what a marvel it is that we're able to build these massive grids and keep them all synchronized and keep the heartbeat running. They're like a living organism, practically. Some people say it's the greatest invention, the greatest build. It's like the eighth wonder of the world, essentially, the grids that we have today. They're incredible. But in order to keep them running properly, they have to keep maintaining the heartbeat, 50 hertz in Europe, and most parts of the world. If it falls out of that 1% range, the grid will start to collapse. So grid operators will say to load, typically it's always been generation in the past. I don't want to get into too deep in the weeds on it, but typically generation through thermal turbines, which are spinning.
Yeah.
I'll get into it in a second. Thermal turbines are spinning all across the grid. This is before wind and solar. This is before we did anything with hydro, really, even though hydro can do this as well. But you have these thermal turbines, which essentially is you heat water up, it creates steam, and you push that through a turbine. You can do that with nuclear. You can do that with gas. You can do that with coal. They all create heat, and you push you push that through a tube, and you heat up the water, and the water turns to steam, and you ram that through a spinning turbine really fast. Yeah. And that's pretty much how we created energy for the first 100 years. What the benefit of that system does is it actually automatically governs frequency on its own without any sort of input. In the beginning, it didn't, but they eventually came up with a way to synchronize all of those turbines together. And if one turbine went offline, impacting the heartbeat of the grid, throwing everything out of whack, they have these little governors that kind of shift open and close to increase the amount of steam. And it's all automatic. That would happen automatically, and it's called inertia. Inertia is essentially, an object in motion stays in motion. These thermal turbines could help each other collectively to be able to balance the grid, the heartbeat of the grid. But as you added in other types of resources that don't have inertia, that don't have a way to govern the steam, it created problems for the grid. Wind and solar in particular create very significant problems for the grid because they don't have inertia and they don't have a way to govern automatically through their systems, although the people are trying to come up with this. And so what you need other resources to compensate for that. Well, if you have a little bit of wind and solar, the thermal turbines can sort of still compensate for that. But as you go to like where some parts of the world, they want to do 60, 70% wind and solar, you can't balance the grid with thermal turbines effectively with that much wind and solar penetration. It'll be too hard, to put it simply. It'll be too hard on the thermal turbines. They won't be able to compensate for that much amount of lack of inertia or lack of ability to automatically govern. And so what grid operators have done is they've said, well, let's ask the load to help participate in these programs, just like we do with demand response. Let's ask them to help us balance the frequency. It's a great idea. A lot of efforts are underway to help this to be successful, but very, very, very few loads can actually do it, for the same reason that a lot of loads can't participate in demand response. So if you ask someone to shut off, because frequency you drop out of frequency by 1%, you have to respond quickly. The grid collapses. You're very fast, seconds. It's called primary frequency response. You need primary frequency response for the grid to survive. This has to happen very fast, seconds, like I said. Very few loads can wind down enough in a matter of seconds to be able to compensate for these types of changes in frequency. But Bitcoin mining can. And not only can it do it quickly, it can do it down to the exact watt. Like it's very, very specific. It's very granular. With the software that people are developing today for Bitcoin mining, you can modulate your entire mine down and actually also program it to like get in sync with the heartbeat of the grid so it can specifically balance it. I mean, this is why I tell people that Bitcoin mining is an incredible technology. It may be the technology that actually helps us to transition smoothly to a clean energy future, because right now, I don't think we are transitioning smoothly. And I think we need to have additional tools in our toolbox to help with that transition. Bitcoin mining is clearly, in my list, it's the top of the list for helping us to get there, not only to help with the grid balancing programs, but actually even to save some parts of the renewable energy industry, which are struggling right now.
Yeah. Incredible. No, it's super informative. And I think the Bitcoin mining piece is something that is, again, so fascinating, but at the same time often gets a lot of critique, right? It's one of the things that people tend to pinpoint if they don't understand how it fundamentally works and the value proposition behind it. But what I think is fascinating is, like you mentioned, Bitcoin mining incentivizes renewable energy. But for my listeners who maybe aren't aware of how that kind of interplays or why Bitcoin would incentivize renewable energy, could you maybe explain that portion a bit?
Yeah, happy to. So wind and solar are great energy resources, but they're highly geographically dependent. So they need to be where the wind is strong and the sun is bright. You know, you want your wind farm to be capturing a lot of wind. You want your solar farm to capture a lot of the sun. Unfortunately, places where there's a lot of wind and a lot of sun aren't necessarily where power is being purchased. So power is bought in what I call, and many people call, demand centers. So a city is a demand center. There's a lot of power being bought in a city. An industrial park is a demand center. A lot of power being purchased there. But you have to get the power to the demand center. And unfortunately, the places where wind and solar is the best is not always close to where there are demand centers. So you have to transport the power from very far away to get it to the demand centers. Those high transmission voltage lines is what they're called, or high voltage transmission lines, I should say. They take the power and they transport it large distances, but they're very expensive and time consuming to build. And so what happens is you have a lot of these wind and solar farms being built, and then they just wait, and they wait forever. Nobody's buying the power, or they're selling very little of the power because they can't get the power to market. This creates very significant problems for renewable energy developers. I talk to renewable energy developers across the world. They're struggling. They're practically in a crisis at this point. If it wasn't for the government subsidies, they definitely would be in a crisis. And so the great thing about Bitcoin mining is it's the opposite when it comes to geography. It is location agnostic. It can be virtually anywhere in the world. And so what you can do is you can place a Bitcoin mine right next to a wind or solar farm, and you can monetize 100% of the excess energy that they create. And it's a lot of excess energy that's being created. To put it into context, California tracks this. It's called curtailment. Anytime a wind or solar farm can't sell its energy into the market, it's considered wasted energy. And the term for it in the industry is called curtailment. If you go to CAISO's website, which is California's ISO, it's their grid that operates almost across the entire state. They track how much curtailment takes place every year. And it is a giant, it's actually growing. Like, we say Bitcoin goes up and to the right. Curtailment is crazy, expanding up and to the right. And they track it. You can go to the website. If you click on the graph that they create, it says it can show you every year that they've tracked curtailment. That graph, if you map it out to 2030, by the year 2030, if they continue on that same path that they're on right now, the same trajectory, the state of California alone, just the state of California, will curtail or waste more energy than the bottom 36 nations combined. It's an incredible amount of power that's being wasted. And that's just one place. So this is a problem. It's a problem all across the world. It's a problem that Bitcoin mining is solving. You put the Bitcoin mine right next to these wind and solar farms, and you say, listen, I got all this curtailment. I can't sell it. We'll sell you that. We might want to sell you more than that, but we'll sell you all the curtailed energy for almost nothing because we can't even sell it. It's basically worthless. So we'll sell it to you for super cheap. Bitcoin miner loves that. They love cheap energy. They come in, they buy up all that excess energy, but they're providing ROIs to these renewable energy developers who need this money badly. Some of these guys are struggling. We talked to them. They're really in a bad place. So Bitcoin mining quite literally could be the tool that saves the renewable energy sector. Batteries are great. Like, I like batteries, listen, but batteries are not going to solve the whole problem. Batteries can't solve for a lack of transmission lines. The battery is going to soak up the power, and then what? What's it going to do? Where's it going to send it? There's no transmission line to send it anywhere. So batteries are great. They're part of the clean energy transition, the future. But you need things like Bitcoin mining if you want to get there. Otherwise, we're going to be waiting 10, 20 years, 30 years for the transition to fully take place. And it'll be a bumpy landing. It's not going to be a soft landing. It's already being a bumpy landing. So I would encourage renewable energy providers and people who care about this technology, care about clean energy. I mean, you should be in love with Bitcoin mining. You should be trying to do everything you can to attract Bitcoin mining to your region.
Yeah. Fascinating stuff. I think it's so fascinating and so premature, let's say, in terms of the Bitcoin mining's impact on these industries. But I think I'd love to get back to specifically your journey. But then I assume the mining part kind of led in, or you learning and actually physically mining Bitcoin led into Satoshi Action Fund, right? So how did it go from you mining Bitcoin in your garage to then saying, okay, I need to start Satoshi Action Fund?
It's a great question. So I think it's important to go back to where we were in 2020 before I started launched Satoshi Action. We were all locked in our basements. We were all locked in our sort of offices in our homes. The pandemic was taking off. I think at that point, a lot of people became very concerned about the ability they saw how quickly everything got shut down. They saw the world come to a halt. And we're all asking ourselves, like, what if they could do this? I mean, this is way bigger than what, they would need to do to stop Bitcoin, to stop Americans from using Bitcoin. So there was this fear that really set in that, like, the government really does have a lot of power over our ability to move around and operate and transact and interact with each other. And a lot of people became worried that they might have to flee the country if they wanted to still use Bitcoin. Because at the time, everybody thought, well, Bitcoin is counter to the U.S., that somehow the U.S. and Bitcoin's financial systems can't operate together. I don't agree with that, but a lot of people were thinking that way. And so they thought, well, if Bitcoin is competition to the U.S., then they're going to want to get rid of it. So I kind of sat around for a while. And I started feeling that way too. I was listening to the doom and gloom people on Twitter, and on Clubhouse during the shutdowns. Mm-hmm. But I woke up one day and I said, you know what? I think that I want to pursue a more positive future. I want to pursue a future where the United States is a leader on this technology. I want to pursue a future where Americans all benefit from Bitcoin and we all walk towards that bright orange future together instead of living in fear. And so that's when I started the process of deciding to launch what eventually was Satoshi Action Fund. At the time, it was just me yelling into the void, on Twitter and saying, hey, we got to talk to lawmakers. We got to meet with them. I helped multiple lawmakers get educated on this stuff. I helped them to better understand the benefits of Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining. But eventually I realized it wasn't enough. I couldn't just do it on my own. I couldn't just be a lone voice out here yelling into the void. I needed to actually take action. And that is why in June of 2022, we launched Satoshi Action Fund. And when we launched it, we decided, okay, what are we going to do to truly move the ball forward? Because I don't want to just be out here yelling into the void and not producing results. So right away, we came up with a strategy to pursue the states. We view the states as the laboratory of democracy in the U.S. For those that might not be familiar, outside the U.S., the states have a lot of autonomy. They make a lot of their own decisions, especially around Bitcoin mining. If you care about Bitcoin mining and you're in the U.S., the states are critical because the vast majority of energy policy rate schedules how much power is, whether you have demand response programs, whether you have grid balancing programs, whether you're part of a regional transmission organization or an ISO or basically a sort of a regional grid. These are all decisions made by the states.
Yeah.
And so if we want to benefit from Bitcoin mining, bare minimum, that's where you got to start. You got to go to the states. Mm-hmm. Additionally, for other types of policy verticals like strategic Bitcoin reserves, which is something we're very focused on, doing it at the states is a great way to start, to build the political momentum that you need in order to get really innovative policy across the finish line. We call it the laboratory of democracy here in the United States. We use the states as a laboratory of democracy to be able to influence the political process across the country and at the federal level. It's a very effective way to approach politics here in the United States. Multiple movements before us have done the exact same thing. I mean, one is happening right now. Look at the cannabis industry. The cannabis industry is killing it when it comes to the state level. They are all across the country passing legislation. They started in Washington and Colorado. Now 75% of the country at the state level has pro-cannabis legislation. And this is despite the fact that it's still a federal crime. So I don't care how people think about cannabis. You could be a pro-cannabis or anti-cannabis. It doesn't matter to me. The point is, even though it's a federal crime, they still were able to get it done at the state level. So that just shows the power of the states here in America compared to other parts of the world where the states or the provinces don't have the level of autonomy that they do here in America. But there's other big movements that were successful at the state level here in the USA. And there's other ones that are happening right now. But in the past, women's right to vote, it happened at the state level. Civil rights movement started at the state level. So we've seen there's all these movements that are successful at the state level. And we realized that if we want to be successful for Bitcoin and avoid a world where the United States becomes hostile towards Bitcoin, we need to go where we can win. And we can win at the state level. We have won at the state level. We've passed 4 bills into law to protect the right to mine, to protect the right to self-custody, to protect the right to run a node, and the right to peer-to-peer transactions. We've also passed a number of other little smaller things below that are less exciting, but they're important for Bitcoin and the digital asset ecosystem. We've also had over 30 bill introductions at the state level. That's a lot. That's an incredible amount. Most of these projects are 2-year projects, 3 years projects. So you're going to see a number of bills starting to pass pretty quickly here at the state level because of this. And yet the federal government still hasn't done anything. Hopefully they will soon. I think a lot of people are hopeful with this new administration that some things will get done, but nothing has happened yet. So we'll see what happens at the federal level. But we can still continue to win because we have 50 bites at the apple. You go to Washington, D.C., you have 1 bite at the apple. You only get 1 effort. You go to the States, you get 50 chances. Those are great odds. I'll take those odds. We have taken those odds. So it's important, I think, that people realize the opportunity that we have to advocate for Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining. And the reason we're at the state level is because the vast majority of energy policy takes place at the state level, but also because it's a fantastic place to build political momentum for a cause that might be bogged down by what's happening in Washington, D.C.
Yeah. Yeah, it's fascinating the way you describe it as indeed the states being the laboratory of democracy, because I lived in the U.S. for most of my life. I'm a U.S. citizen, although I'm originally from Belgium. But I never really thought of it that way, because I myself, when you were talking about the cannabis example, for example, I lived in California for about 6 years, and there obviously was one of the first states to, at the state level, make it legal. But then obviously you see that at a federal level, it's still not federally accepted. So I didn't really connect those dots with Bitcoin and doing it in that same like grounds up movement. So I think it's fascinating what you're doing. And what has the response been so far since you started on this journey from policymakers? Because I think also, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think probably a lot of what originally maybe the disapproval for Bitcoin mining stems from is maybe also a lack of awareness of how it actually works and how it can actually help them. So what is what has the experience been like initially since starting Satoshi Action Fund, and then how has that changed over time?
Great. Yeah, it's been a huge improvement. So when we started, we launched Satoshi Action in the middle of the FTX collapse. So lawmakers weren't exactly interested in having conversations about the technology, yet we persisted. So when we first started, despite the incredible headwinds that we were experiencing from the FTX and SBF collapse, and God, this guy, people always say, they bring him up to me and it's like, don't worry, we hate him more than you do. Really caused us a lot of problems. But
yeah.
The lawmakers that we were able to have meetings with, fortunately we were able to, we had to put a lot of work into this process. Getting these meetings was very difficult. We had to find people that were even willing to speak to us. And then we had to convince them about the benefits of Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining. And then if they were in love with Bitcoin mining as much as we were by the end of the conversation, then they would, ask us for policy solutions. And we, of course, had our right to mine legislation. We were able to introduce that legislation in about 7 states, and we passed it in 2. So that was good. That was a big success given the time and that we were new. So, but if you transport forward the next legislative cycle, which was the 2024 legislative cycle, it just ended back in roughly April. For those that don't know this, the states in the US, they're part-time legislators, so they don't meet all year round. They only meet for like 3 months or 6 months, and sometimes they only meet every other year. So it's the big states meet more often, like New York and California, but most states don't. Like they just don't meet that often. They don't have the resources or the budget to sustain a full-time legislature. Oftentimes is usually the reason why. So the last legislative cycle has ended for 2024, roughly around April. We were able to introduce legislation at least of our rights bills 16 times. Now we have other types of policies that we did. I think we got over 20 introductions in total, which brings us to our 30 introductions overall, including some that have happened recently. But in that last legislative cycle, we dramatically grew the legislation. So instead of just saying how we want to cover the right to mine, we're going to do right to self-custody, right to peer-to-peer transactions, right to run a node. So the policy expanded, which makes it more difficult to pass. We ended up introducing that in 16 states, and we passed it in 2 again. So now we're at 4 states that have passed it in total, and we have roughly 30 introductions, including the introductions that we have today. But the thing that changed, because between year 1 and year 2 in the legislative cycle, it wasn't a big difference. We just really had a little bit more momentum. We had a track record. We were able to identify more lawmakers that were more interested. We got a little bit further away from FTX, SBF collapse. So it was a little bit better of an environment. But post-election, I mean, it's incredible to see the interest and the outreach that we get. We are getting more inbound from lawmakers across the United States and across the world than ever before in our history. It has never been this easy. We have never had this many people reaching out to us. We've actually never even had lawmakers reach out to us. We've had to reach out to them. Now they are quite literally sliding into my DMs. They are emailing us. They're filling out our contact form, and they're saying, I want Bitcoin. I want it for my country. I want it for my state, and I want it now. And we, of course, are in such a great place to help them because we have a track record of success. We have 30 bill introductions. We've passed 4 bills into law. Nobody has done this. Nobody has come close. And on top of that, additionally, we're in the game of producing academic level research, even peer reviewed research, which is very important for lawmakers. They won't read it. Nobody does. Nobody reads the peer reviewed research. Nobody reads these long reports, but they matter. They matter because they provide intellectual firepower for what you're trying to get done. If a lawmaker knows that you were able to get a piece of academic research into a peer reviewed journal to support the claims you're making, it dramatically improves their ability to trust and believe that what you're saying is true. Lawmakers don't listen to podcasts. They don't listen to blogs. They don't have the time. They're busy, whether they're part-time or full-time. The full-time ones in DC, they have to worry about the war in Ukraine. They have to worry about Gaza. They have to worry about BRICS. They have to worry about the homeless crisis. They have to worry about healthcare. They have to worry about the economy. There's a million things. The border. There's a million things they have to worry about. So when you say, pay attention to me, it's hard to get very much time. Same thing with the state lawmakers, the part-time lawmakers. They have a lot of area issues that they have to care about too. The budget. They don't have a money printer. They have to actually care about the budget. Yeah. So when you come to them and you say, pay attention to me, the problem is they don't have the resources for staff. So a lot of these people, they don't even have any staff. They're just by themselves trying to make decisions. So how do they have the time to research everything all the time? This is where Satoshi Action comes in, and we can play a really critical role in acting as a resource to these lawmakers who don't have any resources. We come in as the issue expert. We provide peer-reviewed research, and we provide winning policy solutions, policies which have already been passed into law as a home run for most lawmakers. And with Bitcoin where it's at today, the price where it's at today, the support that it has, the people that are winning their offices that are pro-Bitcoin, we are now going down the hill. We were going up the hill. We were rolling the ball up the hill for Bitcoin. The ball is now rolling down the hill. We have momentum. We've never had more momentum like this. We've had to fight for every inch. And now we're able to make progress pretty with very little effort, but except we've doubled our efforts now, of course, right? And so we're just talking to way more lawmakers in way more parts of the world, pushing way more progress for Bitcoin.
Yeah, it's incredible. And I think I fully agree with you. I think there definitely is a sentiment change. I think not just in the US, but I think globally. And I mean, I think the US is a leader globally. And I think a lot of countries tend to follow suit on big decisions that they make. And so I think especially since the new administration was elected, I mean, and even before that, but now especially, I'm noticing also a lot of momentum going towards Bitcoin. And so, what for you? How do you see kind of the next year playing out from a nation state perspective, let's say, in terms of adopting and actually making meaningful progress on some of these initiatives?
Well, we're so excited about 2025. The legislative cycle is going to restart at the federal level. It's going to restart at the state level. A lot of states are going to be introducing strategic Bitcoin reserve legislation. We have at least 10, we were saying up to 10. We started to say at least 10. I think that's where we're going to be at now, is 10. Could be more. 10 states, 4 countries that we're talking to now as well. And they all want more Bitcoin. They all want a strategic Bitcoin reserve. It's very popular right now. It's a very popular policy vertical, and we are going to do everything we can to help lawmakers to be able to get this solution across the finish line. People often ask me, what are the chances that a strategic Bitcoin reserve policy passes into law? And I have to tell you, it's actually near 100% that it happens at least one state. And we've never said that before. We've never said that before. We don't even like to give a percentage because it's usually very low. It's like 20%, 30%. Passing laws is difficult. It's not an easy thing to do. But there are some states that we're able to work with where there's a task force, and that task force is made up of lawmakers, and that task force, what they do is they review policy before to decide if it's something they all want to get behind as they go into the legislative cycle. It's sort of like a pregame, so to speak. And they pass legislation out of there, and then it goes to the actual legislature to see if it passes into law. 100% of the bills that they have passed out of that task force have passed into law. And our bill just passed out of that task force. So, I mean, the odds are very, very looking very good for this one state. And that's just one state. We have many others that we're working with, and we're very excited to be working with some great lawmakers across this country. The best part is, people say, well, why do the lawmakers want to do this? Well, some of these lawmakers are Bitcoiners. One in 7 Americans owns Bitcoin or some other type of digital asset, with Bitcoin being by far and away the greatest one that they own, by far and away the most that they own. So we don't really have to convince them to do it because they want to do it. It's for Bitcoin. They hold Bitcoin. They own Bitcoin. We're meeting state treasurers. We're meeting state reps, state senators who own Bitcoin. This one guy, he just won his office. He said, I've been in Bitcoin since 2017. I want the very first bill that I introduced to be a strategic Bitcoin reserve legislation.
Wow.
So needless to say, the momentum is here. The odds of success are high. We're feeling very ambitious, which is part of the reason why we launched our new fundraising goal. We need to raise $500,000 to get this legislation across the finish line.
Wow.
People don't realize how efficient we are. We are the most efficient when it comes to spending money. Our dollar per bill passed is extremely low. You go anywhere else, you can throw millions of dollars. I mean, politics is very expensive. You could throw millions of dollars away in Washington, D.C. and get nothing out of it. $500,000 is nothing compared to what can be spent. And we're able to get it done, and get it done very effectively, get it done very affordably, get it done in a way that is going to produce results. And also, once we win, we can win even more, because the great thing about legislation at the state level is these states love to copy each other. So if you pass one bill in one place, the lawmakers in the state next door are like, well, we better do the same. They're gonna compete against us. They're gonna win. They already got the first mover advantage. We better copy them right away. Otherwise, they're gonna get ahead of us. The states love to compete. It's a great way to advance policy, not just because of their laboratory of democracy and trying different ideas out, but also because they're very, very ruthlessly competitive with each other.
Yeah. Very, very interesting. And I think, one question that I'm going to ask you is, because we talk a bit about the states being the laboratory of democracy, and things initially starting at the state level and then growing to the federal level. But obviously with the new administration and Trump being at the Bitcoin conference and having had talks about this, and this being well known that this is something that he is also aware of, at least, how realistic do you see it from going to a state level, but also immediately jumping that next level and also going to a federal level in the U.S.?
It's a great question, because I think the odds are significantly lower at the federal level. But again, it's because you have one bite at the apple. It's very difficult to get things done in Washington, D.C., but the odds are higher than I think people would anticipate. I mean, look at Polymarket right now. It's like 25% odds. That's very high for this. This is a very innovative, cutting edge policy. So the opportunity, though, is for us to be able to add momentum. So we want to pass this at the state level, because when we do it at the state level, there is going to be a reaction at the federal level. They're going to notice that this is happening at the state level. In fact, we're going to be meeting with these lawmakers and saying, hey, your state is passing strategic Bitcoin reserve legislation. You should look at what Senator Lummis is doing and consider endorsing her policy and endorsing strategic Bitcoin reserve legislation.
Yeah.
If we're able to do it at the state level, we can impact federal legislation. It's not, again, going back to other examples, this has happened before. In fact, there's a Bloomberg study in 2018 that said when there's a flurry of activity at the state level over a policy issue or a movement, there's a federal reaction. It happened with women's right to vote. It happened with the civil rights movement. It's happening right now with cannabis right in front of our eyes. And it's going to happen, I think, with strategic Bitcoin reserve legislation.
Yeah. Very exciting times that we're living in. I'm excited to to follow along, and especially on your journey. I know you're probably very busy right now, lots of demand, so very excited to see how that develops. But in the interest of time, I know we're running out of time here, but one of the final questions that I have for you is, given the kind of the point in the cycle that we're in right now, we expect a lot of not just individuals, but probably institutions and nation states to enter the Bitcoin space, let's say. So what is your main piece of advice for new people entering the Bitcoin space?
I love to answer this one because it's exactly what I did. I think it's very important when you find Bitcoin. The best thing that you can do is spend a year, 2, 3 years studying it. Buy some Bitcoin. That's great, but study it as much as you can, because you're going to dramatically change your views and your perspectives on Bitcoin over that time frame. And it's very easy to get Bitcoin wrong in the beginning. Fortunately today, the difference between 2017 and now, 7 years ago, is that we have a lot more educational material. The people in this space that educate are extremely brilliant and can deliver very salient points on why you should want to get behind Bitcoin. There's all this great information out there about how great Bitcoin is for banking the unbanked, providing financial services, how great Bitcoin mining is for balancing the grid. There's so much now that none of that existed in 2017. So you might be able to educate yourself faster, but take the time to educate yourself, because Bitcoin is going to be the backbone of the global financial system, whether it be 10 years or 20 years from now. It is going to play a major part in our lives. And so understanding how it works and why it works is valuable. I would say also look at other areas in other sectors to better understand Bitcoin. So look at how money works. Look at how energy works. Try to figure out how the Federal Reserve works. These things will really influence the way that you think about Bitcoin. When you understand how those sectors operate, then you can better understand why Bitcoin has so much value. Because without understanding those areas and what's wrong with them, it can be hard to understand where Bitcoin mining fits in and where Bitcoin fits into a future for America.
Yeah. Great advice, and I couldn't agree more. And as we wrap up the show, of course, I'll put all of the links to your website, to your Twitter as well, in the show notes for my listeners to check out. But any final remarks or areas where you might want to lead my listeners to?
I would say, for those of you that have hung around, you got to look into getting politically engaged, whatever way you can. If you write letters, if you send emails to your lawmaker to tell them to endorse Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining, I would even say some of you should run for office. Start low, start at a low level. Don't try to shoot for the moon. Politics is a long-term game. You have to have a low time preference, which means that you're not concerned with how quickly it happens. And just try to participate in some way. If you hate politics though, you're like, gosh, I don't want to do politics. Dennis, do the politics. That's the way this works. that's great. Find someone like Satoshi Action, find someone else that's operating in the political space and support them. They need your support. Those groups are doing it full time and they're dependent on donors to be able to get the work done. So if you want to see my team be successful at Satoshi Action, you can go to satoshiaction.io and you can donate to our work. We will guarantee that we'll get some wins for you.
Awesome. Dennis, thank you so much for your time. I really enjoyed it. It was super, super insightful. And I think my listeners will definitely feel the same way.
Great. Thank you so much for having me on.
Awesome.